Hello and welcome to our Treasure Island Discs edition. It's a two-part discussion with four lecturers from the University of Liverpool. I'm Tunde Varga-Atkins from the Centre for Innovation in Education. And as you can hear from the title, the podcast is very much inspired by Desert Island Discs from Radio 4. But instead of casting our guests away to a deserted island, we asked them to consider how they would inhabit their treasure islands with their students, which is spending precious contact time together, whether it's physical or virtual, in these social distancing times. So I will ask each guest about a Lightbulb moment with the students, and then ask them to identify an album, a pedagogy or a teaching approach, and a teaching prop and a luxury item that helps them relax after the Treasure Island visit. So who wants to go first? I think it's Stuart. So can I ask you then, Stuart, to please introduce yourself, your discipline, and your Lightbulb moment, and which is basically when you felt your students were getting it, and that you were part of this, and how this has come about.
So I'm Stuart Wilkes-Hague. I'm reader in politics in the Department of Politics. There's been lots of Lightbulb moments, actually, but one that I'd really pick out is a number of years ago when I started up a kind of extracurricular initiative, which was this radio program made by politics students, and the idea was we'd just make these weekly radio shows, try and understand what was going on politically. Everything had gone mad with kind of Brexit and Trump and so on, and I didn't really know if it would work, so I just I advertised it to all students, said if you want to do this, come along, and students volunteered. And I thought, well, I don't know how long this will work, but they kept coming. So there was no credit involved. It wasn't part of their course, but I could tell that they really loved it. I loved it. It was these, and I've continued it since. These have been the most amazing moments of my teaching career, because the buzz around making these radio shows is just absolutely incredible. And what it made me realize is actually sometimes we're too hemmed in by our curriculum. We're too hemmed in by the way we assess. We actually make assumptions about students won't do this, they won't do that. Actually, if we do create something where they can see that they're really learning something from it, that they're really getting value from it, they will keep coming back. And they kept coming back. So in the end, I turned it into a module, and we've carried it on in a similar way. And it's completely different from any other teaching I've ever done before. And it made me realize there's a lot of transferability from that to other forms of teaching as well.
So that sounds really, that buzz sounds amazing. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we can pick up perhaps what you mentioned about transferability?
Well, so the thing is about radio, particularly if you're going live, which we were, and we're recording now, but anything that's live, you really do get a kind of adrenaline surge, right? So the stuff's going to go out there. You've got to be ready. So the students who'd volunteered to do this, and as I say, now it's a module, they really get that sense every week. Everything builds up to this moment. It's an important moment. They're primed for it. They don't want to let each other down. So this is the other thing, the perennial challenge of group work in universities. Students always complain about the other students and so on. Well, in this context, there's so much mutual dependency. They know how much they're relying on each other to get through this hour and to not come across as complete idiots. So that's what creates that moment. And we're doing stuff that's often very challenging, because the news is changing right up to the moment we press the button and go live. So you have to be absolutely ready for anything.
That sounds
that's what's really special.
That sounds such as you said, both the being live, the buzz of the activity, and then it's so realistic. I guess it's really what happens in real life. Yeah. So can we pick up what you said about creating these spaces? So, this started from a creative, flexible space in a sense, and now you've transferred it in the module. Were there tensions or, in between that, going from a free space into making it work in a module, or did it just organically work anyway?
So I had to think really carefully about that and how to do it. So the nature of making news-driven radio is such that when you transfer it to being a module, you don't want to define a curriculum. So you don't want to say, you know, in this module, you will learn about the politics of this country, or you will learn about this particular political concept or idea, because what you'll be covering week in, week out is, you know, driven by the news. So you don't want to predefine it. So at one point I did actually ask, can I run this module with no defined learning outcomes whatsoever? And, you know, whatever happens is the module. And I was told I couldn't do that. But then I realized actually what I needed to do is try and turn things around and define the learning outcomes in relation to the production of radio. To make all of those kind of transferable skill things, which people probably often don't think about too much, really make them the main learning outcomes. And then the content in terms of learning about politics of different countries, different political debates and so on, that's kind of secondary, but they get that as well, almost not realizing that's what they're doing. So it was that kind of shift in my thinking about how to design a module that was so critical.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. So I think it's now time to cast you away or take you to your treasure island. Can you choose, can you discuss what you would take with you? An album, can be a real music, because I know you like music, can be a pedagogy, teaching prop, and a luxury item for you as well.
Well, yeah, I had to think a lot about this actually, and about what that might be and how I'm going to change my teaching across all of my modules next year. And in the end, what I settled on was this homemade thing I have, which is my Swingometer. Right now, people might not know what a Swingometer is, but if you've watched any election night program, you will have seen it. So it's this thing with an arrow which moves left or right to show which party is gaining since the last election relative to the other main party. So I made one for one of the election nights we once had, and it's a flexible one in that, I mean, I made it out of bits of wood in my cellar, right? So I made a kind of blackboard element, an old style blackboard. Brilliant. So you can write chalk stuff on it, and then there's an arrow I made out of another piece of wood, and you can put that in different positions. So I can amend this Swingometer to do almost anything, to show change in almost anything, to show progress, whatever. So if I only had one moment of teaching per week with my students, whatever the module, I think I'd take this, because whatever we were doing, I'd fundamentally like to be talking about where they're at, and we'd mark it up however we felt appropriate to define their progress or whatever. And it's a totally flexible tool. In terms of luxury, all I really want is my Spotify account and a device to play it on. So if I could just have, even if it's an old style iPod with no phone, so long as it's got a Bluetooth speaker and a Spotify account, I can listen to whatever I want, then I'll be happy. So if you'll let me have that.
Yeah, I'll let you have that. Also, because I guess in our treasure islands, we're going to have to have Wi-Fi and connectivity, because in the social distancing campus, that's one of the things that we will be needing. So I can definitely let you have Spotify.
Thank you
Brilliant.
very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, so hold those thoughts. I love the Swingometer. Hope you can send us a picture of that as well. And can I turn to our next guest, Anna? Hi, and again, can you please introduce yourself and let's start with your Lightbulb moment.
Okay, so I'm Anna O'Connor. I'm a senior lecturer in orthotics in the School of Health Sciences. And Lightbulb moments. Well, there's a couple that I was sort of thinking of. One, really early days, and in my teaching career, and it sounds dead simple. When I started, as a clinician, that's what I worked as first. I was in hospitals, and there's just some basic fundamentals. You just know that if the eye does certain things, it's this, or if it does, and this is why. And it's just kind of your bread and butter. You just don't think about it. It's just there. And then, sort of teaching the first years, and you're thinking they're getting it, and then the marks come in, and the exams, you're like, they're not getting this. And it's like, yeah, I need to, but within the teaching sessions, they're sitting there nodding at you. And it's all of that kind of, right, actually, I need to check their understanding before that and make sure that they get it, because what they're telling me and what they're actually understanding is two different things. And also going back to basics a lot more and not making assumptions, because it's something you apply to every patient, and you just know it, but they have to get that knowledge level. But I think there was another one that I just want to bring in, was because we're always talking about movements, eye movements, orth meaning straight and optics meaning vision. We're looking at the eyes and how they move and how they stay together. and you can't put movement onto a PowerPoint. You can put in PowerPoint, but it doesn't replicate real life. But they don't see patients until quite a while later. So you can talk about things, but they often don't get in. I went to a learning and teaching conference at Liverpool, and they're talking about animations, and they were saying, oh, we did this. I think it was some surgery, skin flaps they were talking about. And I just get excited. I'm sitting there going, we can do this with eyes. Eyes move. This is brilliant. We need this for eyes. We need, things that move is just perfect. So, ever since then, we've sort of been building up like a portfolio, really, of different eye movement animations, different tests, so the student can click on this and select this, and what happens, and they can move through it at their own pace. They can repeat it. So there's it just gives them that opportunity to interact and engage with it.
So does that mean then that you now feel students, having been exposed to these resources, and what you said about introducing some earlier checkpoints, that you can see that development and understanding a little bit better?
Certainly for some of, because I sort of revised how I taught things, and yes, definitely there is a lot more getting it at an earlier stage. And with the animations, so far what we've been doing is asking the students their perceptions about it. How do they feel about it? Do they enjoy it? And it's been overwhelmingly positive in that respect. And it's very difficult to actually attribute exam assessment marks directly to one tool that you've used, because there's other teaching still going on. But yeah, I mean, we certainly feel it's beneficial in sort of from the student engagement perspective, and enjoyment with the learning, as well as the actual attainment at the end of it, and potentially that taking that forward into sort of once they're seeing patients.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the design process of these animations as well? So that's obviously you as you're designing that for students, you are also incorporating some of the teaching aspects in making sure that they will work the way the way you want them.
Absolutely. We've had to go back to basics, just from the perspective of the person we've been working with doing the animations. We have to say this moves this at this speed in this direction we've got to break it down. So it's really good for us to kind of go, hang on, what is exactly happening? It takes us back to basics as well. But also from a pedagogical standpoint, it's like, right, well, how can we make sure the students understand what's going on, and then layering that within the teaching. So it's not just about creating this tool, it's how it's then used.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Thank you. That's a lovely insight. So casting your way, what are your desert island disc or treasure island disc? So now, obviously we will go into a period of socially distanced campus. What can you take from these Lightbulb moments? What would you like to take from these Lightbulb moments into your treasure island with the students? And then similarly, a teaching prop and luxury item for you.
Well, obviously from teaching prop, I'm thinking the eye animations, but if you had to sort of go back to basics, give me an eyeball. A big model one, not a real, sorry. A nice big model eyeball. I can move it around and show things. And that would be a sort of a good prop, or something that, like I say, the animations are engaging with the students and sort of interacting in that way. In the luxury item, I think, like Stuart, it's got to be music, and a range of music, because then you've got like something to make you happy, to something to dance around to, something to relax to. I love a good sort of musicals, a bit of 42nd Street or something. Get me sort of singing along, dancing around. That helps me.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm sure the students would enjoy that as well.
Yeah, I'm not good at dancing though.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Anna. So let's turn to and hold those thoughts, because we will meet on the Treasure Island in our next podcast. But I think our third guest, James, is waiting. So can I ask you again about Lightbulb moments and introduce yourself just briefly?
Okay, my name's James Gaynor. I'm a lecturer in chemistry. In terms of a Lightbulb moment, I tried to pin it down to one, but there's been quite a few. So what I've tried to do is try to just think of the different types of Lightbulb moments I've had. So there are I have four main kind of scenarios where I teach. So large lecture, medium-sized groups of about 20 or 30, small group, and then in the lab. And when I kind of break it all down, the times that I've had realizations that the students are just getting it are when we're doing something quite active. It sounds quite simple, but it's you know, in a lecture, using things like clickers so you can get some direct feedback. In workshops and tutorials, it's just the act of questioning and kind of honing how you question students to make them think. Don't just give them the answer. And it's a classic technique. But I suppose when I came into this role, you don't really get training immediately. You teach and you do training on the job, so you're kind of learning as you're going, really. So it was kind of a realization that, you know, the act of making them think, be active, and then again, similarly in a lab where it's quite important, where they often follow a script, trying to give them the opportunity to not just follow the script, but to query and question the script. Because there's a health and safety issue, we need to make sure they follow health and safety when you've got 100 people in the lab at once. But given the opportunity to critique it makes them more engaged, and the more they engage, the kind of is the better. So enjoyable activities that make them engaged generally leads to a realization that they understand or have an appreciation of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So that's similar themes to what Stuart talked about, enjoyment and fun and active learning, as
absolutely.
Anna mentioned as well. And I mean, that's interesting what you said about critiquing a script. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've simplified it a little bit. Techniques I've used before is where I'd give them a lab script in a jumbled way. So this is a technique that has been done elsewhere in the chemistry lab, and they have to order it. And it might sound simple to order it, but understanding the process of how a reaction works is quite important. Something I introduced, which I've not really seen done anywhere else, is I use questions to consider. So these things there's a script, but at every single point it kind of asks them, you know, why are you heating this up? Why are you measuring this out to 4 decimal places? Why are you taking the top layer in a separation funnel, rather than just blindly following the script? To try and basically, it's a way of switching from a cookbook style to more inquiry based, without having without being brave enough to go fully inquiry based when you've got 100 students. Because there's just too many variables then. So it was a way of just trying to make them think about the script without actually binning the script and letting them decide what to do, which in a chemistry lab is a bit scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, risky.
Yeah.
And
quite.
I guess you are also making a subject which is not necessarily, I'm not sure, when I hear health and safety, it's not necessarily a subject that people would be thinking it's fun or, you know, would be jumping around. But then I'm not a chemist, so I probably can say things out. But it's kind of making that, as you said, enjoyable and intriguing. Try
to. Everything I do, I try and... Making it fun is one step into getting them to engage. If they're engaged, there's more chance of learning. So it's the way I try and do it. And again, trying to do it for some subjects that are considered to be quite dry, can be challenging. So yeah, just making them active and think. Lectures have their place, but even within a 50-minute lecture, you can have them thinking by asking them questions.
And then can you talk a little bit about the role of you or the lecturer in this point? So let's say if you give them this activity of the jumbled, you know, how do you see your role in that, or what do you normally do in those tasks?
So it usually be in a workshop type arrangement where so I'd have, say, PhD demonstrators with me as well, but they just basically talk in a group amongst themselves. And then they'll come up with a suggested arrangement, call a demonstrator or me over, and then we can just discuss it with them and say, well, you know, measuring out this before adding that just seems, is that a sensible way of doing it? So it comes back to the critiquing of the script and making them. It's like if you want to bake a cake, thinking about each step and why you're doing it. Do people really do that? No, they just follow most people just follow the method. But do you know why you have to add the egg at a certain point? I'm not a baker. I'm sorry. People think chemists are bakers, but they're not necessarily bakers.
I think Stuart can add something based on your Twitter feed, Stuart. I think you know a lot about cake making.
Yes. So, but that's kind of the background principle to make them think about the technique. So when they are in a situation where they haven't got a method, they can make the method themselves.
Excellent. Okay, I think it's time to slowly roll to your treasure islands. What would be your items and albums to take there?
So in terms of kind of the what to take with me, it would be, well, I would take a lab, a chemistry lab. It's quite a big item to take, but it's a fundamental aspect of chemistry teaching, and a requirement of our programs is that they have lab-based experience. So I would take a lab with me, and even though I've been advocating active learning, sometimes it's just you need to have a go and have a play at doing stuff. So some of the active learning stuff can be done outside the lab, but in the lab they actually have to have the hands-on equipment and using equipment. So that's why, that's what I would take with me. Okay.
We will see. I might have to talk to my superiors to ask if you're allowed to take a whole lab to the treasure island, but I think it should be okay.
Okay, that's good.
Under certain conditions. Okay, thank you very much. Oh yes, your luxury item.
I'm considering Spotify's allowed, I'd go slightly the other way and have a TV with Netflix built in.
Okay, so, that's fair enough. Yes.
So
good. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, James.
Thank you.
And then our last guest, but not least, Diana, have we got you on? And so can I ask you please to introduce yourself and talk about a light bulb moments with your students?
Hi, Tunde. Thanks for the invitation. Yes, I'm Diana Gitsa. I work on African history in the history department. And I've had, like others, I've had so many light bulb moments, and actually some of my best ones have already been taken by the other people. But I think for me, the light bulb moment does always boil down to that thing of getting students to think for themselves, because that's when the light bulb comes on, when you do your own thinking and you suddenly think, oh, now I get it. So this is really just saying what other people have said in some ways. One of the things that we do in one of our first year modules, where we're trying to get students to recognize that there are ways of understanding history that don't revolve around Europe, and that if you are based in another part of the world with another history, the history of the world might look very different. And one of the ways we start this is just very simple. We show them a map of the world, we turn it upside down, we put Europe at the bottom at the side, and then we ask them, why are the lines on the map drawn where they are? And so many of those lines are straight. Why are the lines straight? And most of them have never thought about why is Europe in the middle of the world map, and they've never thought about why the lines on the map are the shape they are. And they certainly haven't thought about why Greenland looks almost as big as Africa. So you just get them thinking about those things. And we ask students to keep a journal. And this is the first thing they do on that module. And the first thing they say in their journal is, I never thought of that before. I had never asked that question before. And that for me is what it's about. It's getting the students to work out what are the right questions to ask. And once they can do that, then they can do anything. And we've had some fantastic examples of that this week, because one of the things we cover is Black Lives Matter. And another thing that we cover has been Roads Must Fall. And the students have kind of learned the history and the background and so on. But mostly what we've said to them is, why are these things happening now? And why are they taking the form that they are taking? And my inbox this week is absolutely full of students saying, wow, this all makes sense. I understand what's happening now. I understood the news. So that's what
it must be fantastic for you.
Yeah, well, it is. I feel a bit smug, actually. Only last week I was talking to your colleague Joanna about whether I should ditch doing Roads Must Fall from the module, because it was kind of not so contemporary anymore, and we want students to reflect on the history of contemporary events. And then, wow, it all just blew up again. So, but it is all about asking those questions, and also understanding that it doesn't matter what kind of history you're doing, you can always ask a question. So if you're doing international history, you can still ask questions about culture. if you're doing cultural history, you can still ask questions about politics. That it's all about the questions that you're asking, and that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself with the questions you ask.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, also what you're saying, that one of the way you're making these light bulb moments is empowering students to ask questions, and as you said, turn the world upside down, looking at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, and to do that collectively as well. One of the most useful bits of advice I was given when I first started teaching was, when you look at your timetable and it's got L on it for some of your teaching sessions and S on it for others of your teaching sessions, that doesn't stand for lecture and seminar. It stands for large group and small group. And what you do in those groups is entirely up to you. You don't have to lecture in lectures. And getting students to talk to each other in lectures and do collective activities in lectures can be really effective, because they get the buzz of being there all together and doing it all together.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great. I love language plays as well in questioning pedagogy. I think that's also something nicely illustrated. Okay, so I think it's time to go towards your treasure island now. What items would you take with you?
Well, this is a hard one, isn't it? For me, there's no obvious thing like an eyeball or a chemistry lab. It would be great to be able to take the British Library. I mean, if James can have a chemistry lab, why can't I have the British Library? But failing that, to be honest, what would be really useful would be a whiteboard with lots of different coloured and never running out marker pens, and a very large whiteboard, because I think there's an enormous amount that happens when you just write things up in response to what students are saying, and then underline things in different colours and write things in different colours and draw arrows that connect things, especially for students for whom text isn't necessarily the easiest way for them to absorb information. To be able to draw things and do arrows and shapes is really important. So I find just that the basic whiteboard is a really useful teaching tool.
Excellent. I'm sure we can let you have that. And then luxury item for you?
Well, and again, this might be cheating a bit, because what I want to do when I stop working is I like to do something with my hands, like sewing or knitting, but that doesn't work unless I'm also listening to something. So what I need is a package where I've got an infinite amount of sewing and knitting projects, plus something that will play me audio books and Radio 4 dramas at the same time.
Okay, excellent. Or you can join Stuart or Anna in their treasure islands and hook up their Spotify secretly. Or not so secretly. Okay, excellent.
As well, I'm at it, yes.
Thank you. That's lovely. Oh, that was brilliant. So I think this concludes the first part of the podcast. So we've got 4 treasure islands, and let's see in our next part of the podcast how we might take these ideas forward into the next year. So thank you very much for listening.